Hello, everyone. You can hear me now, right? Wonderful. Well, welcome. Oh, I'm a little excited. Welcome to this gathering from surviving to thriving. My name is Alexander Fournette. I'm the Associate Director of the Curb Center for Art, Enterprise, and Public Policy here at Vanderbilt University. So on behalf of the Curb Center in Vanderbilt, I wish you all welcome, and I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful conversation about artists and creativity this afternoon. I just have a couple things to say. I'm going to pass this over to Jill Mcmillan in a moment, but I've been told the most important thing I have to say is that I want to give you a heads up that we are live streaming, and there will be a recording of this gathering online later on. So if you're writing down some notes furiously and you missed something, don't worry. You will be able to get that information later on. I want to pass the baton pretty quickly to Jill so that we keep things moving, but I just wanted to say that the Curb Center at Vanderbilt being a place that nurtures conversation, research, teaching, and practice around the role of arts and creativity and cultural expression in society is honored to be part of this gathering, and more broadly of this national research lab with the National Endowment for the Arts. This research lab, of course, started and is still at Vanderbilt, but through the hard work of Jennifer Novak-Leonard, who is now at Northwestern University, we continue to participate in this project in a way that is most obvious through the work of Megan Robinson, who is a PhD candidate in sociology here at Vanderbilt University. And of course, this is a collaborative effort, like most creative efforts, and so I'll pass this along to another one of these creative collaborators, Jill Mcmillan. Thank you.
Good morning, or I guess good afternoon, everyone. It's been a long day already. Thank you, Alex, for hosting us here today and for letting us have this event here at the Curb Center. As he said, my name is Jill Mcmillan. I am the Executive Director of the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville. And we've been really fortunate over the past two and a half years to be a participating partner in this NEA research lab with Vanderbilt, Northwestern, and the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. When we were approached about partnering on this research initiative and to have our Periscope artist entrepreneur training graduates involved in this study, we certainly leapt at the opportunity. Knowing the incredible caliber of artists that we've had through this program and the success and impact of Periscope on their careers, we were excited to learn more about how these artists perceive their own creativity and how that related to other domains of creativity and everyday life tasks. For those of you not familiar with the Arts and Business Council, we're a 13-year-old nonprofit organization here in Nashville championing the sustainability and growth of our creative sector. Working at the intersection of arts and business, we provide the education, opportunities, and resources that artists need to build thriving careers, and to also encourage the private sector to invest in and sustain the arts and culture of our city, whether that's through nonprofit board service and donating and supporting to the incredible nonprofit organizations we have here, or fostering creativity in their employees inside their companies as well. You can learn more about our mission and programs at our website. It's www.abcnashville.org. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for our e-newsletter, because that is the way you can keep up to date on other programs and events that we have similar to this, research convening, and other services that we offer for artists in the creative sector here in Nashville. So one of the ways that we support artists is through our Periscope Artist Entrepreneur Training Program. Periscope is an annual program of the Arts and Business Council that we host in partnership with Metro Arts, the Nashville Entrepreneur Center, and the Mayor's Office of Economic and Community Development, and the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. An application-based program, Periscope takes 20 artists annually through an intensive professional development curriculum that includes in-classroom sessions to learn critical business skills, small group breakout sessions with opportunities to share resources and build social networks, and small one-on-one mentorship with experienced business mentors to refine their business plans and prepare their careers for the next level. This program culminates in an event called the Periscope Pitch, where at the pitch, creative entrepreneurs are able to share their business plans with the public through one-on-one conversations and displays of their own design, some of which you can see here in this bottom photo. And then a select number of Periscope graduates get to actually pitch their pitch their businesses in a presentation style similar to Shark Tank or a TED Talk to the public to build connections, garner support, and even compete for cash awards to seed their creative endeavors. Having just completed the 6th year of our Periscope program, we've now graduated 125 local artists of all creative disciplines through this curriculum. These graduates have gone on to start creative businesses, win awards and accolades in their respective genres, and have had an incredible impact not only on our local community, regionally, statewide, nationally, and some even internationally in their endeavors. In addition to our global reputation of Music City, Nashville is an epicenter of creativity and talent in all forms. We have it all, which I'm sure a lot of you know. From choreographers to clockmakers to jewelry designers and multimedia content producers, and those were just some of the artists in this year's class. So, nationally, artists are increasingly recognized for their work as entrepreneurs and civically-minded problem solvers, especially agents for social change. Yet, anecdotally, there's a public, persistent stigma around artists as starving artists or transient, which complicates their ability to assign value to their work. So today we'll be exploring some new research that was funded through this National Endowments for the Arts Research Lab program, and it will provide some Nashville-specific insights on current perceptions of artists and their creativity. So following the presentation of that research, we'll show a short music video by local musician Chip Green, who unfortunately could not be here today. And then we will follow that video with a panel discussion on the implications of this research and what we can do here in Nashville to continue to grow our creative economy. So we hope today's event will be a springboard for further conversation around some of these topics. And so to kick us off, I would now like to introduce the principal investigator for this research, Dr. Jennifer Novak-Leonard.
Good afternoon. So to make sure that we recap all the players who've been involved in this initiative, I want to take a moment to talk about the research partners. Again, this effort's been funded by the National Endowment through the Arts through their research lab mechanism. We have a number of institutions and multiple individuals at each institution involved. Obviously, the Arts and Business Council, the Curb Center here at Northwestern, NORC, the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. We have a colleague here in the audience, Gwen Rugg, as well as Norman Bradburn and myself, who I'm now based at Northwestern University, who's up near Chicago. I also want to say thank you to Dr. Dan Cornfield, who's a professor here in the sociology department at Vanderbilt, who's been involved, and Dr. Zorana Pringle, who's based at Yale University, who's also had a hand in the evolution of this work. So the research lab itself encompasses several threads of research. So I want to talk about that at a high level and then bring us in to focus in on the work that we conducted with Periscope research artists. So the lab as a whole has aimed to examine self-perceptions of artistic creativity, generally in the adult population as well as professional artists, to be able to examine how individuals self-perceive their artistic creativity along with other domains of creativity, again, in the general population amongst adults as well as professional artists. And those other domains, some of them are fairly well defined in research and literature, such as the domain around entrepreneurship and business and management savvy, engineering fields, think of STEM fields as a domain of creativity. Some are quite nascent in our understanding of them, but are being increasingly recognized, including social interactions. How do we engage with individuals and navigate those relationships and taking creative approaches to that, as well as civic and community involvement. What are some creative and innovative ways either to catalyze community or to affect community? In addition to that, we want to examine the relationship between the possession of creativity in these various domains, artistic as well as these others, and how that translates into actionable business plans or business practice amongst professional artists. So that was quite a bit, and we're going to be covering a portion of this today, but a lot of this information you can access on the lab's website. It's neacreativitylab.northwestern.edu. So there's additional resources that we won't be going into depth here today, including a broad literature review, technical reports for methodologies around the research, as well as the working paper that we're drawing from today. So I encourage you to visit that site. So as I mentioned, we'll be diving into kind of two key aspects of these broader research questions today. Examining the relationship between artistic creativity and other domains, specifically amongst professional artists, and examining that relationship of how or whether and why it translates into professional business practice. So I told you kind of what we were doing, but why would we be doing this? So the broader context that serves as the backdrop to this is the broad and growing interest in understanding creativity generally. How is it affecting higher education? How is it affecting K-12 education? How are we thinking about this in terms of workforce development? But there's a broad interest in this. And while we have various metrics available to have external individuals kind of pass judgment or objective means to talk about creativity and innovation, oftentimes we don't understand how is that coming from the individual who's engaging in these acts. And we know understanding one's own perception, even though we don't have that yet around creativity, plays an important role. It affects how we make decisions in our personal lives, in our business practices, how or whether we engage civically and amongst our community. And truly we understand from prior research that our own self-perceptions affect our own agency. Now, with this in mind and understanding that notion of agency and be able to affect people or things or places or professional, without that understanding of our individual understanding of creativity, we also have limited information on what the public perceives about artists from the research, from the bodies of research. There was some research done in the early 2000s, and then I, working with a recent scholar who was based here at Vanderbilt, Rachel Skaggs, did a general public opinion survey and what we in 2016 and 17, and what we learned from that is that the dominant perception of artists amongst artists working in our communities is that they are seeking to earn money for their creative products. While there were some minority opinions that expressed recognizing artists as problem solvers, as representatives for their communities, or trying to engage, the dominant perception of the public is that artists are seeking to earn, purely to earn financing for their artistic output. So I'd like to focus in on kind of what we actually did to engage Periscope artists. So we're really trying to think about a very select group of artists based here in the vibrant context of Nashville, whose focus on artistic creativity and also a part of the Periscope program due to their interest in entrepreneurship and developing their own business practices. So to understand the general population, we did develop a broad survey, and the details of that are available in the technical report online. We use those same questions to conduct an online survey just about this time last year, and at that time there were 105 Periscope artists. So we invited all of them to participate. We received 37 responses, so about a 35% response rate, and because we are very adamant about compensating the artists for their time and engagement, they were given $20 Amazon e-gift cards to participate in that online survey. From that engagement, we asked permission if they'd be willing to engage in follow-up interviews. From that, we were able to engage 24 artists through semi-structured, in-depth interviews, about an hour on average, although we had quite extensive interviews with several who wanted to participate at that level, and they were compensated $100 for their time through that in participation. As Jill mentioned, the Periscope artists represent a broad range of creative forms and disciplines, and so we certainly aim to be inclusive of a broad range of creative forms in who we engaged through the interview process, as well as demographic diversity. I'll share briefly with you some insights on kind of the composition of these groups. We had 37 respondents, about 68% self-identified as white, 19% self-identified as Black, and approximately 13% identified with another race, with approximately a third self-reporting that they had a graduate degree. Through our interviews, there's a similar composition that we had about 60%, just under 60% self-identify as white, approximately 20 self-identify as Black and as other race, and again, approximately a third in educational attainment. Due to the small sample size, we're not going to go into greater depth in terms of demographics. So now the question is kind of what did we ask of Periscope artists to actually elicit and to generate the conversations we were seeking to have with them? Through the online survey, they were asked 43 items about their self-perceived creativity, about artistic creativity, as well as these other domains. They were asked about various personality traits. Do I feel like I'm a sleepy person? Am I lazy? Am I a go-getter? So a broad range of personality traits, as well as some additional demographic variables. Through the interviews, we sought to explore the relationship between practice and where they see themselves in the Nashville context of conducting their work. So what does place mean in terms of geography and what's happening here in Nashville, as well as place in terms of who they identify as their community. Additionally, asking them about their own perceptions of creativity and success. What does that mean? What does it look like? As well as what their relationships are between themselves and artists, so their artistic community. So to give us some insights, I want to start with some details of what we learned from the general population survey, the nationally representative survey about self-perceptions of creativity. And so this is just a selection of those 43 items. And we see here that approximately they hover around 20% of the general population saying that I see myself as much more creative than my peers on these measures. So I'm going to read through a few of them. And what we see, we have finding new ways to motivate myself to do something, making up dance moves, launching a new business, finding new things to do when I'm bored, thinking of many ways to solve a problem, leading a group or teaching someone, helping others cope with a difficult situation. So there's a whole range represented here. We still see them hovering around 15 to 20%. Now, that's context for what we're going to look at of how Periscope artists answered these same questions. And what we see is that how Periscope artists report is that they see themselves as being much more creative than who they see as their peers along these same measures. So that top measure there, finding new ways to motivate oneself, that's at about 55%. I think they're much more creative than their peers. They also feel pretty good about making up dance moves, right? But we also see above 40% launching a new business, imagining something you've never seen before, such as an alien is the case that we used here, finding new things when you're bored, thinking of many different solutions, and we can go down this list. And what I'm showing, the full list of 43 items is available to you online. What's represented here are all the items where Periscope artists reported at least 33% of them thought of themselves as much more creative than their peers. But what we see when we're scanning this, my pointer's not working, but that only that second item there relates to an artistic form, dance moves. And then here at the bottom, decorating a room, if we want to consider that as an indicator of a creative form. All of the other items that we see with a high reporting, much more creative, represent notions of being entrepreneurial, business management, those social and civic interactions. So we actually see this group of Periscope artists talking about their creativity across many domains. Certainly artistic is included there, but those didn't necessarily rise to the top. Now, the Periscope artists reported much more creativity across many of these measures. There were a few exceptions that I want to bring to your attention. One is that people in the general population thought of themselves as much more creative than Periscope artists when it came to being able to delegate activities and to motivate team members or collaborators to execute those activities. So we might be able to consider that in terms of how artists are operating. A second item is that the general public, as opposed to Periscope artists, thought of themselves as much more creative in being able to compose an original song. Now, I think we might be able to attribute that to the density and the quality of what happens here in Nashville. So that bar of comparing to your peers is exceptionally high here in Nashville. And thirdly, where the general public thought they were much more creative than Periscope artists was when faced with traffic congestion, being able to find an alternative route. So we'll leave that as a policy discussion for another time here in the Nashville context. So this provides some top-level statistics for you to see how artists are understanding their creativity compared to the general public. And I'd like to invite my collaborator, Megan Robinson, to talk in greater depth about what we learned through the interview process with these artists.
My name is Megan Robinson, and I am a doctoral candidate in the sociology department here at Vanderbilt, and I'll be going over key findings from our interviews today. This study demonstrates ways in which professional artists exercise creativity in non-artistic domains, encompassing everyday life events such as motivating yourself to take on a task that you just don't want to do, or finding new ways to save money. And despite self-reporting higher creativity than non-artists, our findings suggest that artists in our sample don't always recognize and describe their non-artistic creative efforts as being creative, which indicates a disconnect between self-perceptions, practice, and translation of skills. The professional artists in this study showed creativity in business and entrepreneurialism, social interactions, and community engagement. Our findings point toward an understanding of professional artists as multifaceted individuals who have the advanced capacity for creativity beyond traditional artistic pursuits and across social realms, and offer an alternative narrative about artists and their work. A few key themes emerged from our interviews. The first is the relationship between artistic creativity and creativity in business and entrepreneurship. Artists in our sample displayed creativity in business by demonstrating an ability to evaluate the arts market in Nashville, not just in terms of what sells or what doesn't, but also in terms of what's missing in the market and how that artist can step in and uniquely fill the gap in a way that ensures longevity and stability for their practice. Our respondents demonstrated a keen ability to recognize, create, and magnify opportunities in the Nashville market, not just for themselves, but for other artists as well. Entrepreneurial artists have reframed their mentality to think of their art as an active business practice. With this mentality, artists recognize the need to create their own opportunities by curating galleries and educating potential audiences via teaching. Several of our respondents also talked about diversifying their products and skill sets not just in terms of artistic ability and price range, but also in terms of roles they fill in order to maintain their practice, including acting as their own marketing and sales representative and project management, skills that they did not learn during their arts education and had to seek out for themselves. Lastly, our respondents practiced targeting, finding and marketing to the audience who already identifies with their work, rather than making work to identify with an audience. As practicing professional artists, our respondents attest to the need for business skills, including marketing, publicity, communications, and money management. And post-Periscope, the majority of respondents felt more confident in their work, that their work was improving, that they were making better choices in regards to their art, and that they were more effective at targeting their work to an audience. These benefits indicate the presence of an underlying mechanism within artists, namely the unlocked ability to evaluate art production. Artists describe using their creativity to drive their decisions and their business skills, considering art not just in terms of style and purpose, but also time and cost, to elevate their creative practice. Like other businesses, professional artists require capital in order to grow and produce work. Our respondents communicated both the tactics and tensions behind securing funding. A respondent who works closely with an arts nonprofit described the process of seeking alternative, private funding when the organization learned that public funding and operating support was unavailable to them. Another described using a resource evaluation process and reframing projects to better suit funding requirements. In instances such as these, art making happens because the artists engage with two domains of creativity, using both their artistic and business entrepreneurial creativity to reimagine artistic processes into something that better fits available resources, while still maintaining a creative yield. Still, many artists in our sample presented funding constraints and personal financial responsibilities as barriers which limit their practice. The second key theme that emerged from the interviews is the relationship between artistic creativity and creativity in social interactions. Art is inherently communicative and social. Messaging in art requires that artists possess both artistic and social creativity in order to craft work that people can translate and have meaningful responses to. In addition to social creativity in the design and production of a piece, artists in our sample practice a more mainstream version of social creativity by building different classes of networks. We will focus on three: professional contacts, artist peers, and an audience. Artists employ social creativity to further their embeddedness within professional networks. These networks include gallery managers, directors of interior design, festival and art crawl organizers, and arts funding organizations. Several artists within our sample mentioned the need or desire to further their social contacts and discussed the tactics by which they approach network expansion, including emails and social media. Others describe networking through reputation and collaboration. However, many artists express frustration with their ability to expand their professional network, citing entry as their main problem. Artists in our sample who have had difficulty gaining entry into professional circles or who have no ties to a professional contact cited lack of information and professional mentorship in the arts world as 2 reasons for their difficulty. In the absence of a traditional workspace or structure, artists in our sample talked about having to generate their own social groups in order to receive information and support. Artists in our sample use their peer networks to learn about grant and show opportunities and find potential workspaces. While important for professionalization and career expansion, our respondents indicated social networking amongst artist peers has helped combat burnout and protect their mental health. In addition to emotional support, artists embedded into peer networks also receive the community that many respondents in our sample described needing in order to feel inspired and able to create. And while several respondents in our sample prefer to work as individuals or alone, these same respondents mentioned a desire for a shared artist working space to help combat their feelings of isolation. Social creativity was also found in our artists' collaborative artistic pursuits. Collaboration is a process which requires artists to become expert communicators who must cooperate with each other to achieve their shared vision. Collaboration occurring across genres, especially, calls for high communicative ability, where successful products represent dedication to the process, outcome, and professional collaborative relationship. In regards to their audience, showing and sales also involves the strategic use of social creativity. Artists use social cues and body language to determine the degree of someone's interest in their work. The sale of personal work has the potential to be an uncomfortable, frustrating experience for all parties involved. The artists in our sample have creatively refined their direct sales techniques by learning how to read body language, pique curiosity, and draw audiences into conversation. Artists also relayed information about having pitches and scripts prepared for their work to help educate their audience and keep their pricing at the desired level, thus decreasing the odds that buyers will attempt to haggle or give lowball offers for the work. The third theme was creativity in civic and community engagement. Artists craft place. A powerful point of civic and community creativity is the ability of artists to create projects that generate conversation, thereby helping others imagine their own stories or creative potentials. Our findings suggest that the capacity of artists to be involved with the construction of community by intentional planning or just by the nature of their work is limited only by the degree to which artists are supported in their pursuits. Conceptualizing the role of artists in community was polarizing for our respondents. While the majority agreed that artists can help communities process their own experiences as human beings, only a quarter of our respondents were able to cite direct, purposeful, and intentional engagement with community via their artistic practice. A fair number of artists in our sample cited concerns that prescribing roles to artists, be they real or imagined, puts an unfair burden and pressure on artistic creativity. Community art development and planning strategies often refer to artists as placemakers. But as some of our respondents note, funding opportunities contingent on the inclusion of social good components limit artistic freedom, and highlight how assigning a role of placemaker to artists conflates artist identity with artistic practice. 3 artists addressed this specifically in interviews, stating that they would prefer to practice art for art's sake, where funding as an influencer of practice challenges their artistic creativity. As a solution, 2 artists suggested that the city should encourage developers to incorporate artists in their building and design processes, and expressed hope for the viability of those avenues. Our respondents relayed feeling that funding contingencies coupled with variable rates of artist pay from venues verge on exploitation and ultimately impede conditions which stimulate their creativity. Artists are valued as placemakers because of their ability to engage and enhance community with art. But as private citizens who just happen to be artists, our respondents perceived that they have not been given the freedom, cooperation, or trust via funding to engage with community on their own terms. The artists in our sample who choose to engage with community most commonly did so via community organizing, teaching, and partnering with nonprofits, with some artists relaying instances of accidental engagement. For example, one artist chose to paint in a public space simply because they wanted to paint there, and recalled having several citizens approach them during their session to thank them for creating art in that space and for representing Nashville's culture in that way. Other artists communicated a desire to do public art, but cited restrictive and inflexible ordinances, concerns about their ability to maintain ownership of the work or idea, particularly in regards to murals, where murals in Nashville are often used as marketing tools, and difficult entry into public art grant awards as barriers to doing so. So I'd like to bring up Jennifer to kind of wrap up our conclusions for us.
So we also have these recapped in your program for reference. So when we bring this together and we think about the difference in terms of what we understand with recent research about public opinion about artists, focus on the product or the creative output. And what we saw in the stats that we presented, that certainly artistic creativity is there, but there's so much more in terms of how artists are understanding themselves and how they're operating. And what is that disconnect, or what is the questions that it raises? And those statistics that I showed you offer some new language and framework about how artists are operating and approaching their work. So we're suggesting that this may offer some alternative narratives and language to describe who artists are and how they're working. Thinking, synthesizing what Megan shared with you that we learned through the qualitative interviews, we heard a great deal about the Periscope artists' keen abilities to recognize opportunity in the marketplace and to very much do the hustle and be enterprising to create opportunity for themselves. So a broad range of ways to make that happen. But very much the need, the expressed need for peer networks, business training, and mentorship to take that level of business training and development even beyond and to have it more tailored for the pursuits that they're trying to initiate. And as Megan expressed, we heard a lot of varying opinions on this assignment of roles. Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a community engager? Are you a social practice artist, etc.? And kind of whether those are real terms that are being ascribed to someone, if they're perceived in terms of access to funding or resources, but mixed feelings and perspectives on how either fulfilling one of those roles or having that label put on you results in how you're able to operate in your work. We hope this serves as a springboard for this afternoon's conversation.
Terrific. So before we get started with our panel discussion, I wanted to give the opportunity. Chip was going to be here today to talk about this particular music video that we're going to show, and talking about artists as agents for social change, and doing some community organizing and having mission and social implications to their work. This is a video that he just released called In My Town, and so he wanted to make sure that the lyrics and video could speak for themselves. It's about 3.5 minutes, so we will just go ahead and play this.
All these kids play dress up in my town. They're coming from near and far, they come from all around. And maybe they'll get a shot, grab the brass ring. God knows they'll do just about anything. Watch all of these old houses in my town coming down. There's a wrecking ball on South Street, cranes in Germantown. Maybe this is it, we're the big scene. God knows we did just about everything. skyline in my town. They're pushing us further out, they're bringing us down. But we're not moving yet, we're living a dream. God knows we'll do just about anything in my town.
All right, so at this moment, I'm going to invite our panelists. If you'll give us just a minute, we're going to bring these chairs up on stage, and then we'll get started with our discussion. On our panel today, I wanted to take a moment to quickly introduce everybody, and then I will let them, if they have anything to add to their introduction, we'll have them say that themselves. But joining us today, we have Mary Lauren Teague, who is an attorney and artist manager. She just started her own company called Dotted Eye Entertainment. Sitting next to Mary Lauren, we have Caroline Vincent, who is the executive director of Metro Arts, the Nashville Office of Arts and Culture. We have, of course, Alex Burnett, whom you all met earlier, the associate director here at the Curb Center. And then last but certainly not least, we have Donna Woodley, who is a practicing artist and professor, and also, full disclosure, a Periscope graduate of 2017. Actually, Donna, I want to start with you, being a Periscope artist yourself. Was there anything that you heard during the research presentation, or some of the things you're kind of hearing and thinking about, as we're going through this conversation, that stuck out to you, either as especially true or something that you found surprising that you've encountered in your own practice?
I would say certainly the thing that sticks out in my mind is just the distinction between how you identify yourself, like entrepreneur. Am I an entrepreneur? Am I a social change artist? What type of artist am I? And do you have to choose? And that's kind of like a go-between. It's a struggle, to be honest, just because I don't really consider myself. I consider myself all of them, and so I just find myself looking twice if somebody says, "Oh, it's social change," and I'm like, "Oh, well, I guess this is," But next week it might be something totally different. So it could be greeting cards next week. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's what stuck out.
Yeah.
To me.
So looking at your artistic practice as a whole, I think kind of as Megan pointed out earlier, that a lot of what we found through this study is that artists, especially because of the perceptions of their practice, that you're incredibly multifaceted and creative in the ways you're even going about doing your business.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really important to note that sometimes artists can feel pigeonholed by, being called one thing or thinking they're another thing. And so I'm glad you brought that up. That's really interesting for us to consider as we're thinking about how we're talking about artists and their place here in Nashville. So speaking of that and the stereotypes around artists, I'll kind of open it up to all of you. We've all heard the concept of a starving artist, and it's really unfortunate that artists, both historically and nowadays, are somewhat almost committed to a life of poverty if you choose arts as a career and that as your only career. So Donna or Mary Lauren, since you both work directly with artists or are artists yourselves, have you seen that negative stereotype play out in interactions that you've had with businesses, with other peers? And what kind of challenges have you had around self-identifying as artists or working in the music industry, let's say?
Yeah, excuse me, I can answer that. Well, are most of the people in this room students or artists, or
We have a little bit of everything. We have individual practitioners. We
Okay.
have arts organization leaders.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Some of everything. So to speak to the stereotype question, I mean, I come from the music industry and I have a music background and music angle with this. And I feel like in Nashville specifically, the music industry itself embraces artists and especially songwriters, I feel like, which is an art in itself. I would call songwriters artists too. Even though they're not recording artists, their art is writing songs, and that's their intellectual property. And in Nashville, the saying's always been, it all begins with a song. And so I think there's a whole lot of support for them. In seeing the slides, I definitely feel like what's lacking is mentorship for people that are recording artists or are on the music side of things. I feel like Periscope is awesome, and I know y'all have musicians and people in those classes, or in a part of the Periscope group each year. But I feel like that's something that the music industry should be tapping into and using that as a resource themselves. I think that, like anything, you kind of have to take your life into your own hands as an artist. I mean, kind of compare it to healthcare, It's your life on the line. It's your career on the line. So take ownership in it. And if you aren't able to make money and support yourself and make a living doing only your art, then having the ability to be creative and come up with ways to make a living, whether it's teaching voice lessons or teaching piano lessons or whatever it is. If it's being a hostess at Virago, like, do what you got to do in order to be able to do your craft and your art.
I would say one of the things that I've noticed just in teaching in higher ed is that a lot of the art students come in and it never fails, like in a studio class, we'll go around and we'll say, okay, just give me your name, your major, what your focus is. And probably in every class I've had, probably 80% of the students either say they're animation or graphic design. And that creative outlet has a corporate element to it. And so I think that creativity has kind of made a wave, but that in the back, I feel like their parents are in their ears sometimes, because half of them, they don't quite know what graphic design entails. It's a little bit different than drawing or painting, and so I think I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no, I see
think
what
that
you're saying.
You know what I mean.
Yeah.
I think that has like overall has taken place to change kind of like the wave of so very rarely are there any studio art or painters or somebody who wants to focus on drawing, because probably they didn't get the information as, oh, you can definitely develop a career. There's museum studies, curating. So I think that gets lost maybe in higher ed.
Yeah, so there's even some nuances in stereotypes or perceptions of different types of art, whether it's commercial art or more kind of perceived prosperous forms of art, like corporate graphic design, or going in-house as a marketing agency, things like that.
Right.
Among personal visual art practice or sculpting, or things that are more not necessarily seen as moneymakers. So even perceptions of artists among the different types of creative genres as well.
Absolutely.
So one thing that, Mary Lauren, that you said about mentorship, I want to pull out quickly, because as Megan and Jennifer said, that only, I think, 2 or 3 of the artists even mentioned having some sort of formal business training or mentorship before coming into the Periscope program. So in addition to Periscope, Caroline or Alex, do you know of other resources that are out there for creatives to help sustain their creative careers or find these professional networks or business training?
Sure. I mean, I think we always recommend Periscope, obviously, for that area. But I know Lauren Fitzgerald and our staff spends a lot of time with artists, coaching them to a funding application for a program we have. But at the same time, I think answering questions about how to be an artist in Nashville. I think we get a lot of calls from artists moving into town and just trying to figure out the network or figuring out how to connect with people. So we certainly fill that role. And I think, there was another thought I had, but it left my brain. So I don't know if you had additional thoughts on that.
So first of all, I definitely want to defer to you for that answer, but I'll buy you a second or two because I'm going to ask a rhetorical question for which I sort of have an answer, but I wanted to throw it back out there.
Sure.
So what's the problem with the starving artist stereotype, right? What's the problem with that understanding of artists?
Sure. So I think that there is, if we're thinking about all of the ways in which artists create value to our society as placemakers, as preservers of our cultural heritage, history makers, communicators, processors of feelings. There's a bunch of different ways you can slice the impact that artists have on our community. And that's actually one of the questions in here about those kind of unquantifiable benefits. So if they're providing all of those non-economic benefits, but we see that value, why should they be committed to a struggle in their career? What is the disconnect of the value that artists are providing between what we're compensating them for or the resources that are available to them?
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
I could say a few more things about that, but did you find the other thing you were going to say?
No, go ahead.
Okay, great. So thank you. That's a great point. I mean, I think part of the issue with this starving artist stereotype is that it tends to reinforce this sense of identity and this sense of artists doing work that is done out of passion, out of love, and not for money, which is often true, but sometimes artists do work and they should be paid for that work, right? So that is a problem. That's a serious problem with this starving artist conception. Of course, this notion of the starving artist doesn't come out of nowhere. We can look for evidence just looking at statistics on employment and unemployment. Artists are far more likely to, if I have experienced unemployment than other quote-unquote professional workers. They're more likely to moonlight, as other studies supported by the NEA have shown, and they're more likely to be multiple job holders, and there's some very big challenges to becoming an artist. So there's no guarantee once you study to become, let's say, a lawyer. There's a clearer trajectory in terms of what your job is going to be. But for many artists, that's an unclear step, and so. But what doesn't really work with that at the same time is that research has shown that within higher education, often students will feel a sense of pressure to not quote unquote sell out amongst their peers and they're being socialized into prepared for the world of work by faculty who are supported by the university. So they don't necessarily, I'm sure you're an exception, they don't necessarily know what it's like out there anymore because they're paid full time by the university. So there are many challenges in terms of identity, in terms of structures for artists navigating careers.
And actually, I think this is really interesting, Donna. I want to put you on the spot here for a second because you did not go to school originally to become an artist.
Right.
So do you want to talk about your background a little bit and kind of your story and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Okay, so I went to school. I graduated from TSU in '95. I'm dating myself, in accounting, and I worked as an accountant. I actually worked as an accountant all the way up till like 2 months ago, and then I finally let that job go. I'm one of the ones, I had like 3 jobs to sustain myself. But so I started there, quickly realized that I did not want to just go through accounting and sit at a desk and, crunch numbers and all of that. So I did take the CPA. But I already knew that I was going to be doing something different. So then I ventured off and I was like, well, what can I do that I would just love to do even if I didn't get paid for it, which is very interesting that we were talking about artists and the value, their value. But so I went and ventured out into fashion design, took some classes there, took a drawing class, and then put that on the shelf. I was an auditor for like almost 7 years. I got laid off, and then the next month I went back to TSU and got an undergrad in art there, and then got my MFA at Lesley University in Boston. And so that's kind of like the fast story, but it's very interesting journey, and I wouldn't change it. I'm glad that I'm not doing that anymore. It's just a lot more fun, talking to kids and making my own work and all of that stuff. So yeah, that's my background. Did I answer?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
great. I just wanted to call out that you originally were
Gotcha.
an artist,
Okay.
but now if you all saw on your way in, we do have some of Donna's work displayed out in the lobby, so make sure you take a look at that before you leave today. I also want to make a note that when you came in today, you were hopefully handed an index card. If you have any questions, we will open it up for audience Q&A at the end. So if you didn't get an index card, there's a blank page on the back of your program that you can also jot some notes or questions for us as well. A little later on in the panel, we will kind of canvass the audience and grab any of those questions so we can hopefully, if we have time, ask those of our panelists. So jumping back into the questions, Caroline, did you think of the other resource? Or sorry to keep coming back to you. I just want to make sure
I was thinking about Lauren had just done a training on training the artist around working as an artist and studio practices and things like that. So, I mean, certainly we're always seeking those resources and providing those. You know, our staff is sort of providing those as consultants to the artist community. And then I think I wanted to mention our Learning Lab program, which we have some artists in the audience who were part of that. And I know I heard a little bit about, you know, artists being assigned this role of, you know, civic engagement or social practice artist or whatever. And I think really that training we did was to sort of just offer those as options. Like, you might think about this. Like, this might be a way you could use your skills in a different way to get paid to make money, you know. So I think there are those options, and I think we're seeing more and more agencies, especially in city government and in, you know, just around, you know, nonprofits wanting to hire artists to do various things. And I would just sort of say, like, that doesn't mean you have to do that all the time as an artist, but it's certainly a revenue stream that you might want to consider, because we have seen it be really successful. And I think as artists get more visibility through projects like that, through public art projects or through social practice projects, then their names are out there and people start like, oh yeah, I've heard about that artist. I'm going to call them to do X, Y, or Z project in my development. So I think there's some value to it, even if it's like, I don't want to be a social practice artist forever. But it just, I think, does lend some visibility to an artist's name, and getting paid to do it is better than like sort of that exposure argument that we are trying to do away with. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is that you're saying if engaging with the community through your art doesn't necessarily have to be social practice all the time. There are other ways to engage with the community and get funding and get your name out there if it doesn't necessarily have a social justice angle or some sort of direct social change aspect to it.
Yeah, and I mean, it might be that you do a social impact project because you're really drawn to it, or in the moment that's something you want to work on, but I don't know that it means you have to
that
identify,
your new
you know, as
role.
that. Yes.
Yeah. I'm also going to shout out Lauren for another props here because we are having a creative exchange conference kind of born out of this conversation that we're having about building peer networks and some of the needs we've seen identified through Periscope. So we will be having another one-day professional development conference for arts practitioners and arts nonprofit leaders on October 25th, and Lauren's going to be speaking about that at that conference about getting your art funded. So if you are interested in that, more details on our website. We can talk about it a little bit later after the fact. But there are resources out there for artists to learn how to build networks and get their art funded. So I want to jump back quickly because, Donna, you said you went and got your MFA in Boston, correct? And that is because there is no MFA program here in Tennessee that we know of. And so how do we, you know, as we're looking at Nashville being kind of this creative mecca where artists are flocking to have creative careers, how do we improve the talent pipeline? So if we're looking at having artists here, you know, MFA programs, resources, what can be done is kind of, you know, what other, you know, is an MFA program really important? Do we need to have a university start one?
I would say that, in my opinion, it's important. It bears importance based off of the individual's goals. There actually is a new MFA program here. It's a low residency program at Watkins.
There you go.
So
breaking news.
That yeah, that's the head of that program is Jody Hayes, she's a practicing artist here too in Nashville.
And is also a Periscope alum.
Yes.
Way back.
Yes, yes. So yeah, that I think that's a good start. I believe that MFA programs are important because it's not necessarily about having that degree to teach is more so about what you learn in that process. And you can start here. Like when you start, I found this just in many of my peers, that when you start here, but you end up like in a totally different place, in a totally different process. And it just teaches artists to really expand their thought process and their critical thinking brain cells. So yeah, I believe it bears some importance. I don't think it's necessary in order to succeed, because there are several entrepreneurs who, may not have even gone to college, and that's just not what the path was. And so. Oh, go ahead. Oh.
Finish your thought before I jump to something else.
I was going to say that I think Nashville has a really, really supportive vibe for artists here. So I can't really, but I think other than maybe like a focus on collectors, just recently at Fisk, there was Elliot Perry and Derek Forger, and they had there was a really thoughtful conversation centered around collecting art. And he's out of Memphis. I think Derek lives in New York, but I think collectors would be, or having access to collectors would be a great asset to our community.
Interesting. I love that thought. And so, Alex, I wanted to jump to you quickly because I know some of your research has dealt with artists in the education system. So can you talk a little bit more about what you've learned and some of the research that you've done specifically?
Sure, with pleasure. So I've been working for a few years now on a project called the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. Jennifer Novak-Leonard is on their board. It's a huge survey. Now over 200,000 arts and design alumni from across the United States have been surveyed from fields ranging very broadly within the arts and design, from art, including architecture, dance, all the visual and performing arts, as well as arts administration, arts education. And a really important finding, actually, related to what we were just talking about, is that SNAP research shows that about a third of graduates stay in the place where they study. So it's actually, it would be a really, there are other ways of getting into the arts than through higher ed, but it would be a really helpful pipeline to develop more of these types of MFA programs. Other findings that you might find pertinent to this conversation, to the striving and the thriving and the surviving part. Yep. It's interesting because I was thinking about the business skills, and I was struck by, I think 2 of the 24 interviewees said that they had developed some type of entrepreneurial or business skills directly through their education. And the SNAP research numbers are not that different. Only about a quarter of people who were surveyed said that they had developed entrepreneurial skills as part of their education, and about a quarter said they had developed financial and business management skills. But 3/4 of these people said that they needed those skills. They were very important to their current occupations. So there's a huge skills gap there. And I'm not an advocate for trying to vocationalize higher ed and just train people for that particular thing that they need, but it seems like a pretty big gap that we have there. So that would be something that we need to address, and that some people, of course, are addressing. The more recent numbers are slightly better, where about a third of recent graduates say that they have developed those skills. But this would be something that I think, based on this, connecting it to this report, that people in higher ed really have to think about.
Yeah, so not just focusing on the technical development of art, but also strategies for thriving in a career when you choose the arts as well, I think is kind of a big takeaway we can take from this conversation, looking at business skills and looking at the ways in which you can be a successful artist in this world. So another thing that the artists pulled out in these interviews that Megan mentioned specifically, funding and financial responsibilities. I think especially in Nashville, we all know Nashville is changing, progress is happening. The constraints around even living in the city, whether you're an artist or not, are changing. So artists who are financially stable are able to be more creative, and they can be innovative, which serves to elevate art scenes over time. So Caroline, this may be a question for you. Talking about funding a little bit, do you know how Nashville or the state of Tennessee kind of compares to other states relative to funding, kind of what that landscape looks like?
Sure. I mean, I think comparatively as a city, funding, we are certainly very far behind as far as funding for like pass-through money that we would grant back out into the community. We are, I would say, about 25% of what our closest peer cities are. We fund out $2.5 million a year from the general fund, and say like Austin is more at like 10 to 12 million. Charlotte just passed a tax that's going to get them to like 25 million that they're, sort of moving back out into the arts community. And of course, a lot of that is through organizations, because when you give out grants, it's got to go to nonprofits. But of course, there are, direct artist funding opportunities. And then just the general, like, if you're funding arts and culture, and that is the main thing that, we want to be part of our identity, then I think, of course, that's going to impact the artist community directly. So that's something, I've been in this job for 1 year, but certainly a conversation that we're having with our elected officials, and just talking about, what is the long-term play for, arts and culture in Nashville. I think certainly part of the conversation right now, and I would encourage you to stay in touch with us and continue that conversation with your elected official, and just, knowing that we are pretty far behind. We should be further. We are grateful, for the money that we do have coming through, and it certainly makes a big difference. And we are able to fund operating support for many organizations, and that's been important. So we try to keep that there versus, just funding projects or programs where you kind of have to come up with a new idea each time. So certainly a conversation we're having, and something that we're working on.
Okay, awesome. So it is something, we're cognizant of and talking about, and hearing that a kind of critical mass is needed, and how can we get organized, what can we do around these conversations, when I think the interesting comparison, when you're saying other peer cities are about 4 times more funded than we are per capita right now, but consistently the Nashville metropolitan area is ranked within the top 4 of most arts vibrant cities in the country. So it really speaks to the creativity and the high caliber of artists and arts organizations, arts administrators that we do have here, because we're doing so much with relatively little compared to other peer cities. So it's really unique, and I think we can, almost a backhanded compliment of what we're doing with the resources that we have, and how we're utilizing funds and collaborations and partnerships and all the amazing work that our creatives are doing. So in these other states and cities that have these kind of more robust funding structures, they use a mix of strategies. So can we talk about kind of what some of those strategies are, or if you think there are ones that would be feasible here to secure some of that funding here? We want more. How do we do that?
Right. Well, I want to point out, Stephanie Silverman is back there. The Nashville Arts Coalition is an advocacy group here in Nashville that is sort of organized around this idea, and Stephanie has been there. I think you're still the president, as long as we'll keep you, or you won't run away from that job. So I think there are, organizing entities around that process. So I think when you talk about dedicated funding, it's usually a tax of some sort. So there's, various ways of doing that, sales tax, other taxes. Tennessee, it's tricky because we probably want to stay away from things that require enabling legislation at the state level, just because that could be tricky. So certainly there's conversations around tourism dollars or other ways we could access funding a little more easily. So I think there's all sorts of different ways people have done that through admissions taxes. There's like the sin taxes, where it's like a tax on cigarettes or some other sort of thing. So I think there's many different mechanisms, but it's just sort of like, how do you organize around that? How do you get support for it? I think obviously Nashville has a lot of civic issues that we're facing right now, and traffic, affordable housing, homelessness, things like that. So I think we have to be smart as artists and arts community, and sort of say, like, how can we help those issues as well, and how can we sort of participate in civic life in a way that supports all of these issues that we're having. So I think it's a long-term play, and I think we have to think about what is the identity of Nashville. It's music, it's arts and culture. I think that is something that's certainly worth fighting for in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a question and it just jumped out of my head. That's not great. The thing I was going to say, I just remembered as I said that. So one of the funding mechanisms we do have that hopefully you all are aware of is the Specialty License Plate Program. So the Specialty License Plate Program provides about 80% of the Tennessee Arts Commission budget, and all of that 80% of the budget goes directly to grants that they give out to organizations across the state. So the next time you go to renew your license plate, please do think about getting an arts license plate if you don't have one already. It's an opt-in program, so it does vary by the amount of people that get arts license plates every year across the state. So that is one immediate direct way you can help increase funding in the state, is to get a specialty license plate. And that is tn.gov for more information about that initiative. So Mary Lauren, I wanted to throw it to you quickly because you work with artists that travel nationally, internationally.
Yeah.
So do you feel that this conversation is specific to Nashville, or have the artists you work with traveled to other cities? Is this happening elsewhere? As to how is the crunch for arts funding kind of different across the country or other cities you visited?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's unique to Nashville. I will say if you are a recording artist and want to be a recording artist or want to be in the music business, then definitely the main cities for that are Nashville, New York, and LA. And then I'd put Austin behind that. I'd put Atlanta behind that. But it's pretty much Nashville, LA, New York, really. Those cities are definitely the most highly concentrated for record labels and people in the industry. One point I would make is just that, and I teach a course at Belmont, and I tell my students this because a lot of them in the class are artists and they've moved from small towns and now they're here, and they've just got big stars in their eyes and all these goals and things they want to do. But one thing I always tell them is, what is your goal? Like, what do you want to do as an artist? And I think that probably applies to visual artists too, although I don't really know much about what the options are if you're a visual artist. But if you're a recording artist, like, is your goal to sell out arenas? Do you want to sell out arenas? Do you want to be Carrie Underwood? Do you want to be Madonna? Who do you want to be? Or do you just want to make a living and like be able to just sing and make enough money to buy a house and pay your mortgage and support your family and play clubs? I think a lot of people that move to Nashville specifically think that they have to get a record deal with a major record label like Sony or Warner or Universal, and if they don't do that, then they can't be an artist. So a lot of them will move here, they'll shoot for that, they'll give up after a few years, but really, I mean, at their core, my advice to them and my advice to my students is always like, do you have something to say? Are you an artist? Are you a true artist where you don't feel like there's anything else you can do? Like, if you get up every day and that's all you want to do and that's all you can see yourself doing, well, if the talent's there, I mean, that's like a bare minimum. Like, you do have to have a commercially viable talent. Like, you don't have to be Garth Brooks, but you have to be able to carry a tune and have something that people want to listen to. And if you do, then I think that if you have the work ethic, then there are ways, especially now in the digital age that we live in, where you don't have to have CDs on the shelf at Walmart and Target and Best Buy and whatever other big box retailers there are. You can make a living and you can figure out how to make it work. And you don't have to record at the most expensive studio and hire the most expensive, well-known musicians. There are a lot of my students at Belmont that use the free studios on campus, and they, their roommate plays drums, and then the kid down the hallway in the dorm plays guitar for them, and like, they make it work, and they can go through TuneCore or another company, CD Baby's another one. There's several, the Orchard, and you can go through those companies and get your music out there and figure out how to make a living. Like, you may not make $100 million, but you can probably make enough to support yourself if you actually do have the talent and the work ethic to do it. So,
absolutely. I love that. So bringing it back to kind of the central conversation and the theme of why we brought everyone together today is the perceptions of artists. So, if we're thinking that there is a persistent stereotype that artists are destined to struggle. They're starving artists. You have to, do the hustle to make it. But then we've heard all this research about the incredible contributions that artists make to society and that their art lends to the economy, our community, and our culture. So how can we as artists, as arts administrators, as leaders, either communicate with artists to help them change that perception about themselves, or how can we communicate to our peers the value that artists bring to the table? What are some strategies around that narrative?
Well, I think for my whole career, it's just always been about paying artists, always advocating for paying artists, because I can't tell you how many times I've been asked to get an artist to do something, but we don't have a budget, or we don't have money, or we can't afford it, and it's just like, well, then don't do it. I think it's just really simple. Like, you don't ask police officers to do their job for free, so why would you ask an artist to do their job for free? So as an administrator, that's just always the number one thing I say is like, well, sorry, it doesn't sound like a project we can work on if you don't have a budget for the artist. So I think, on the flip side, from an artist perspective, of course, when you're starting out, sometimes you do have to do things for free, or you do have to kind of get your foot in the door. And in any business, you do that. But I think at some point you do have to sort of say, like, okay, well, this is how much it costs me to do this project, and so I'm going to have to make sure I'm making money on this. So I think it really just comes down to sort of advocating if you are in a position of power and a position of making policy or decisions, and then as an artist, sort of just making sure you're working with people who share your values and who have a budget, and that is true for any project that you start on, or as a consultant, or any sort of business. So I think just making sure we do that.
To that point, one example that I always use is no one would go in a grocery store and fill your cart full of groceries and food and whatever you want, and then like literally walk out the door and load your cart with it and not pay for it. But on the flip side, people don't think twice about streaming music for free and not paying for music. And that's just a shift that we as an industry need to help just change people's mentality. And we are shifting. It's a slow shift, but anytime people are like, well, why should I pay for that? It's like, well, you'd pay for a carton of eggs at the grocery, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because culture, as it's named, is so pervasive. We're hearing music on the radio, we're seeing, we can stream any television show any time of day. And when you actually start to think about all the people's livelihoods, all the editors, producers, actors, all the talent that goes into making those things, you really start to change your perception of the value of those cultural items, and breaking that down to visual art, to photography, jewelry, anything. Everyone's kind of definition of the creative economy is different. The hours when people do get an MFA program, you're paying for that value of that person's expertise in making that item. So I think if we can all start to do some kind of perception shifting and talking about value in that way, we can help get artists paid, and making sure that our organizations are funded so we can pay artists, and hopefully recognize the contributions that artists are making to our community, especially here in Nashville.
If I can add to that, so just to be the academic for a moment, so
Sure.
What is creativity? Creativity, generally speaking, the definitions, mostly within sociology that I can cite, would say that creativity is a combination of, in terms of a product or an idea, it's a combination of novelty and appropriateness. So you create something that's new, or a combination that's relatively new, and it is seen by gatekeepers or members of a community as something that's appropriate, that works within this context, it's conventional enough and different enough at the same time. So in that particular sense, you can think about a songwriter who's dealing with an A&R person, a writer who's dealing with an acquisition editor, that kind of thing. But if we broaden the scope of what artists are doing in society, who are the gatekeepers? Who are the people who are deciding what an artist is doing, whether or not that is creative, is a conversation that we need to sustain, not just in this room. We need to have this conversation with several people and consistently, because the artists working in communities, sometimes that work is not seen as being creative. And if anything, what I really like about the work related to this research lab is that it's not just looking at artists' self-perceptions, but it's also looking at how other people view artists. And that's really the two-sided conversation that we need to have.
Absolutely.
I think artists need to value themselves and be confident in pricing and what it is they have to say. I will be honest and say that I have struggled with that, but over time, that's something that I think I've gotten to be pretty decent at.
Yeah.
And so I think it can start there. And then it's one of those things where, like Dr. Phil says, you teach people how to treat you. Mm-hmm. So if I feel like if we value ourselves and we value our work, and we proceed from there. I'm not saying everything else will fall into place, but at least that's a good start, you know.
Yeah,
So.
and I think there are certainly extraneous factors with housing and education and traffic and a lot of things that we can pull into this question of value as well. But to your point, you know, we've baked into the Periscope curriculum a whole session on value, and we hear many times from people going through that program that even identifying as an artist is hard because some of the perceptions around that feel negative, and you know, I'm going to identify as a creative entrepreneur because then I'm going to get paid, because people associate a different value with those words. So, you know, if we can kind of take ownership back of artistry and creativity as positive things and talking about all the value that they bring to the table, perhaps that perception will shift a little bit. So at this time, it is 4:20, so I want to open it up for audience Q&A. If you do have a note card where you've written down a question or the page of your program, if you want to tear that out, Gwen and Jennifer will be coming around to gather those, and we will just sort quickly because we don't have a ton of time for questions. We have about 10 minutes. Fabulous, thank you. Oh boy, we have a lot, so this may take us a second. Okay. I'm going to start one for you, Donna.
Okay.
And then I will kind of sort through the rest of these while you're answering this question.
Okay.
But somebody wanted to go back to what you said earlier about developing a cadre of collectors and kind of developing that supply and demand here in the market. So I will just start with the way the question is written and then kind of rephrase it for you. So in the time of the Harlem Renaissance, we saw a global value increase in fine art. It took the development of collectors. How do we collaborate as a sector to develop a collector culture in Nashville? Do you have answers for that or thoughts?
So I do. So in Memphis, there's a show called there's the Young Collectors show, art show. The young lady who created that, her name is Whitney Hardy, and it's an amazing. It started out at an old church, historic church called Claiborne Temple in Memphis, and I was a part of that show. And then I went and I was like, wait a minute, this is different. You know how you'll enter shows and it's like, okay, good, I got in a show, you know, this is good. But when I was there, I was like, she's doing something very intentional. And then the next year it was at the concourse, Crosstown Concourse, I believe is the name of it. But it's something that is growing every year. And it's geared toward bringing collectors together to not only go view art, but to actually purchase it. And so it's anybody can apply, is my understanding. I think they have people submitting work from all over, but it's a really, really good opportunity to be able to get your work in front of a collector to actually pay what the artwork is worth, and of course you're pricing your own work. So if there was something like that here, that would be the bomb, you know.
So if there are creative entrepreneurs in the audience that want to take on an initiative like that, Jana is your idea lady. So I also want to shout out to that question. There's an organization called Locate Arts that is doing a lot of great work in the statewide visual arts scene. They're organizing the Tennessee Triennial for 2021. That will take place in Memphis, Chattanooga, and Nashville. And so locatearts.org, tristararts.org is their new organization name, but doing a lot of great work in the visual fine art scene. So another question, Caroline, it looks like this one might be directed to you. How do artists learn about the opportunities for community and social projects? And then there's another one, somebody asked about learning about community resources, peer networks, mentorship, etc.
Sure. I mean, this is an easy question. Our website, artsnashville.org. You can sign up for our e-newsletter. We have everything that ever happens coming out of Metro Arts, including Thrive, funding, other public art opportunities, opportunities for training, are all in that e-newsletter or on our website. So I would just say check that out. And certainly our social media feeds are, we're often, just resharing, other things that are happening out there. So any opportunities that are coming through, coming our way, we're trying to push back out there. So just make sure you're following us. I think we're at Metro Arts Nash on all the Twitter, Instagram, all of that stuff. So certainly using that as sort of a clearinghouse of opportunities and information.
Yeah, absolutely. Metro Arts is a great resource. I'll give our plug again. Our website, abcnashville.org, ABC Nashville on most platforms except Instagram, ABC_Nashville. And we have an opportunities hub on our website where we do employment opportunities, calls for art, volunteer opportunities as well. And so this next question, I think if I'm reading it correctly, we've talked about it a little bit, but this is a bit more specific when it comes to funding and describing the value derived from art, because a lot of people are looking for measurable products and impacts and data. So what can arts administrators and educational something do to improve the market perception of value that comes from art when there is no measurable product in the moment? So if there's not a creation aspect to it, how do we describe that value, or what are some impactful ways in which we can talk about art?
I mean, I'll just say for our projects that we fund, we're asking often for how many participants were there, what zip code are you working at, where is the project location. I mean, we're collecting a lot of data just around those types of things and overlaying that geographically to see where projects are happening, where artists are working. So yes, and that's an area we're just getting into a little bit further as far as extrapolating data, turning that into a narrative that people can understand and see numbers that they are like, oh, I get it. You're doing work in 100% of the council districts, or things like that. So that from our city perspective, that's something we're working on, and certainly thinking about what are those practices and how can we also share that with artists and make it easier on artists to do that work. And we're also working on a project with Bloomberg Associates and a company out of New York that does these data clinics where they lend you their data scientists. So, just taking all the data that we have and sort of throwing it at people who do that for a living and seeing what we can, sort of find out from that is an area that we're certainly exploring.
Cool. So Alex, this question is for you. Speaking to vocationality in higher ed, isn't teaching painting a vocational approach? What is wrong with vocationalizing higher ed?
That's an excellent question. I'm trying to look if I know anybody in the room who would have asked me that question. No, there's nothing wrong with vocational education. There's nothing wrong with that. What I was trying to say was the job market, the economy, these things change so quickly that it's a bit of a struggle within higher ed to try to equip people with the skills for the job market of tomorrow. You don't want to equip people for the skills for right now necessarily because things change so quickly. That's really what I meant.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. Because it actually dovetails nicely with the next question that also, Jennifer and Megan, if you have insight on this, please do say something. But is there any sort of national conversation around developing a basic set of business and survival skills that are integrated into the accreditation of every art department that grants degrees? Is there some sort of national conversation around business skills in art degrees?
Do you know, Lauren?
Yeah, come on up. We're going to invite Lauren Fitzgerald from Metro Arts to take the microphone.
Hi, my name is Lauren Fitzgerald. So I do know that there are several foundations who are working to develop rubrics and to embed in any program that will take them. So that means nonprofits, that means educational institutions, that means government institutions. So they're really trying to figure out what does it mean to have a measurable tool that's validated, and thinking about that, they have instituted conversations with actual artists to lead that conversation to inform what that rubric looks like. So I know the Tremaine Foundation has one. It's called Artists Thrive, and so there are different other tools. USDAC has one. They are not a U.S. organization, like a government organization. They just name themselves like that to seem validated. So it's about validation, and it's about what does it mean to have these tools so that people can utilize them universally.
Thank you so much. Follow-up for you. Is there any discussion at Vanderbilt about some of those courses happening, or Vanderbilt does have an MFA in creative writing, so are there other creative disciplines that you're looking at for MFA programs? Can you share any information about that?
This is a very easy question for me to answer because I'm relatively new here. I don't know. So perhaps Jay, the director of the Curb Center, has an idea, but I'm not familiar with that conversation yet.
Okay, great.
Well, and I will say Alex and I have had conversations about our program, Learning Lab, and his program with the public scholars, and thinking about community engagement skills, public or project management, and things like that. Like, everyone needs to know those things. So how can we sort of pull that together and think about how do we, sort of activate that? Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, the Canadian in me is coming out with this, not boasting of our own work here, but the Curb Center's Public Scholars Program is not only for, it's for graduate students, not necessarily in the arts, but they're using arts and cultural approaches to working with community.
So how would someone go about finding more information about that Public Scholars Program?
Well, it's for PhD or graduate students at Vanderbilt University, but you're welcome to look at the Curb Center website at Vanderbilt.
Okay, fantastic. It is 4:31. That is our allotted time for today. So I know we didn't get through all the questions. A few of us will be sticking around if you'd like to ask those questions one-on-one. Jennifer and Megan will also be here to answer any research-specific questions. As I mentioned, the Arts and Business Council is having a creative professional development conference called Creative Exchange on October 25th. It's a day-long professional development conference. It will be on a Friday. So please check that out on our website if you're interested in continuing this conversation. As Jennifer mentioned earlier, we do hope this is a springboard for conversation around what it means to be an artist in Nashville and the great work you all are doing in your respective practices and organizations to help catalyze this conversation. So thank you for being here. Thank you if you're watching the live stream. We really appreciate you being here and learning some more about this research. Thanks.